Welcome to Creative. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and this show is located at the nexus of creativity and technology. Each episode, I sit down with creatives of all kinds, artists, writers, musicians, designers, directors, you name it, to explore how artificial intelligence is shaping their creative process. How did they get started using AI tools? Where are they now in that relationship? And what do they really think about AI and creation? Let's dive in. In this conversation, I speak with Todd Tibbetts, a professional creative and founder of Happy Awesome Studios, who shares his extensive experience with artificial intelligence in the creative industry. He discusses the evolution of AI tools, their impact on creative workflows, and the balance between efficiency and originality. Todd emphasizes the importance of intent in AI-generated art and the need for authenticity in a world increasingly dominated by AI creations. In this conversation, we discuss the rapid advancements in digital tools and the potential for AI to empower creators by reducing barriers to entry. The conversation also touches on the ethical considerations of AI in creative work and the need for a balance between technology and human creativity. Todd's been using AI since long before Sam Altman and Elon Musk have been fighting about AGI, so I think you'll find his viewpoint invaluable. All right, so I am on here with Todd Tibbetts, who I have to say has one of the most awesome company names that I've ever heard, because you can't hear it and not be like upbeat, jazzed. It is Happy Awesome. And thanks for coming on, Todd. Introduce yourself to our listeners. Tell us a little bit about you, and we'll start exploring you, your creativity, and artificial intelligence.
Great. Thanks for having me, Andy. Yeah, I'm Todd Tibbetts, and I'm a professional creative person. Yes, Happy Awesome Studios is my studio. It's because people can't spell my last name, so I wanted something memorable and a little bit fun and silly. I've been in the creative industries for about 35 years, starting as a graphic designer, then doing art direction, creative direction. And so if you do the math, my first full-time job as a designer was in 1990. So I've seen a lot of changes. I think that's why we're here today. I've seen most of the changes have come in the last handful of years for me, more changes than I've seen in 35 years.
Well, that gets to the crux of it. But before I dive into that, just so people listening understand, you have to check out his website and his work, because, Happy Awesome Studios isn't just the name of the studios. Like, you see his artwork, it's very distinct, could only be made by him. And there's a joy to it, that, and I don't know if wistfulness is the right word, but a playfulness that just pops. And so the name is fitting. But so 1990, but one of the things that I have found interesting, because people talk about AI as a tool, and there have been lots of tools over the years. But like you said, big explosion lately. But your experience with artificial intelligence kind of predates most people's sort of general awareness of it. So like, if we're going to point to big moments like, okay, ChatGPT, suddenly people are like, what is that? I'm seeing headlines about that. I'm hearing stories about it. And that's 2 years at the most now, where it became into the collective consciousness. And now you can't get away from it. But your work with artificial intelligence predates that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would, if I was to put a date on it, it's 2008 when I first started working with this. And so I got a job at a company called Kiha here in Seattle, Washington. It was a company owned by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen, and he would buy companies, and he would buy a certain company for a particular technology. However, oftentimes he got extra, right? He'd buy a company for their main product, but they would have a research and development department. We would gain possession of all of that research, and our question was, can we turn this into a product? And at that time, when I was interviewed and when I first got the job, I was told by no more than 6 or 7 people that I met, don't say AI. It is not artificial intelligence. That's something in the movies. And what we called it at that time was machine learning, natural language processing, semantic analysis. It was really all stuff that's being done today. But I think the tech industry just succumbed and said, okay, we'll call it AI. It's simple. I can spell it. It's catchy. People won't stop saying it. So, okay, let's say AI. And then the discussion nowadays is general artificial intelligence as opposed to just pop AI. So that's when it started for me. And we were making apps, trying to figure out how on iOS or on Android, or at that time, Windows Phone was still pretty big and really fun actually to develop, especially when your boss is Paul Allen and he can get you whatever you want.
So what did that sort of look like? So you're making apps. Obviously, most of us who are relative newcomers, we know the interfaces, text to video, text to text, and, a lot of the user interface, they've sort of made it easier. What did it look like for you when you were playing around with it back then? I mean, that's 16 years ago.
Yeah, it was ugly. There was very little user interface. And for the creative people out there who are listening, or people who are in the industry working with creative people, I like to think about, what is the reality? So I would go to work at an office in the International District in a building that Paul Allen owned. And we had a team there was different times. It was probably about 75 people. And I was in charge of the creative department. And there was maybe 9 or 10 of those 75 people were the creative team. And we were using Adobe Illustrator to lay out all of our designs for apps. And these apps would be implemented and built by a tech team, which is NLP specialists, natural language processing, and machine learning geniuses. There was a whole test team, so the majority of the company were technical and some product managers. So I would work with product managers and the tech team, get a vision, and then execute that. And my whole career has been figuring out what we want to do and then figuring out how we're actually going to do it. And I see that timing reducing. So in other words, in those days with the team at Kiha, and then we were renamed Aero, ARO, with that team, it would take months to sit in front of a whiteboard. And the biggest tool I had was the whiteboard, sitting with the developers saying, can you do this? And they bring something back to me and I say, oh my Lord, you are amazing. This is great. But actually I need this, this, and this. And it was that process of doing sprints, software sprints. And it would take, if our sprints were 2 weeks long, we'd do a sprint worth of work, see where we were, do that again. It might take 3 or 4 sprints to get something that we wanted. So, as we talk about this, we can juxtapose that to today, where before I go walk the dog, I tell my AI agent to do something. And then when I come back, there's a version of it, right? Or even before I leave. So that was the process we had back in 2009, which was coders would type this stuff and I would draw pictures of it and they would try to simulate.
Got it. So, yeah, I mean, you're touching on the conversations that I'm having with various creators. It very much revolves around, at least part of the conversation, around efficiency, speed, and cost.
Yeah.
That, where AI is now, but always with these tools, it's that, how do they help? And one of the things that I appreciate about you is, and it's grounded in what you've been doing, it's like, let's be pragmatic. Let's drag this into reality. What can we get done with it? But then now, it's like, how can we do it? Well, okay, I benefit from the speed. I benefit from the efficiency, which some of it comes from speed, but also the costs where, maybe you don't need as many people to pull things off. Because when you started saying and I worked with a bunch of coders, I was like, well, that would be AI now. And it's happening so fast since when we had our pre-pod conversation.
since then, which hasn't been very long, we've gone through the whole DeepSeek thing.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, but we've also O3 Mini is out, and they're comparing these models, and just about it takes another step. And I think at least 3 visual models have come out in the last week and a half.
And DeepSeek has announced theirs as well.
Yeah. And so as that competition happens, maybe costs come down. Obviously, that was the big question around DeepSeek. But again, efficiency, speed, these tools now versus then. And I find it fascinating. It's we've always been trying to lean in to the power of compute. It's just a little more accessible now, where you create your art, you give a prompt, and then go walk your dogs. But I want to let that image go. What do you prompt? And then what do you come back to? What do you put in, and then what do you come back to, just to jump a little bit ahead?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do see the speed and the efficiency definitely happening. So to your question, some of the prompts, and I think this is what we'll get into talking about, is I have a workflow as a creative person. I've always had a workflow, and I never really called it that until everybody started using that word. It makes sense. I sit down at my desk with an idea, and I hope that later in the day or later in the week or later in the month, I'm going to be complete with this project, and I'm able to have a set of steps that I go through to get to that end. And it used to be I would do all those steps for team members. The marketing team or the dev team would take some of those steps. But now what I'm finding I'm doing, even though I love humans, some of my best friends are humans, I don't need those large teams anymore. So for an example, there's a AI called Jasper, which is specifically for marketing. And so some of what I might do and walk away from the computer and then come back later is training a model. So I'll give you 2 examples. One, with marketing, you can train Jasper AI to learn your marketing voice, your corporate voice. And that does involve work from me gathering everything and deciding what are we going to feed it. If we feed it too much of one kind of information, is it going to warp the model? I really want a well-rounded model. Sometimes the models take a really long time, 20 minutes. Or even more depending on what you're training. So that's one example, training a model for marketing. Or I also use a tool called Scenario AI, which I can train a visual model. A lot of game developers use this. So if, for example, you're doing a game where there's a magic potion and it's a little bottle of magic potion, and your players might find those potions everywhere, but you don't want it to all be the same graphic, you can train your model to make the kind of magic potion graphics that you want. But that takes training. And often what I'm doing with models is I'm training a model and then generating images using that model, and then creating a second generation model based on the best of. So it's like evolution by natural selection. The best ones come out and they get turned into another model. So that's a lot of the process I'm doing. It's not always training models, but it's finding what are the steps in my process and how can I change those steps in the workflow.
It's interesting. One of the images that came into my mind while you were saying that was, you hear about Renaissance painters, and, you're going around a museum and you're listening to somebody talk about them, and they are always saying that, well, this part of the painting was done by the master. And then these little cherubs off in the corner, they were done by, the Tyro apprentices who were trying to, use the style. And it's yes, you can touch my canvas, but ultimately the work is mine. And it's obviously not a direct parallel, but it's that ability where, and I, as I touched on at the beginning of this, your work is distinctly your own. I see your work and and I'm sure you do some marketing stuff, which is more the brand gets the voice and it's not your style specifically. But when I see some of the stuff that, when you've got your pink monster waving on LinkedIn, it's only you could have done that. And it may have been AI in the steps in the workflow, but your style, your touch, your humanity is there and readily apparent that anybody can type in pink monster waving Oh, we're going to...
Sorry for the interruption.
No, it's all good. Was he asking for coffee?
Something else. Okay.
But when you're talking about training up the model, and I've done that as well. One project that I undertook just to play around with the tools was to dust off an old pilot idea that I had for a show. And I was like, how quickly can I come up with a pilot? I've got a whole bunch of information. I've got research notes. I've just got a pile of stuff. Feed it in, ask questions, get answers, refine, and you have this body of stuff that it can build on. And I don't know about you if you've had this experience where you then sort of pose a question or you pose a challenge and it takes it a while. And you're like, I've stumped you, AI. You need to work on this. But I've trained you so that you're looking over it. So you're being careful and being mindful of what the goal is. And the goal comes from our tastes, our preferences, our goals with the material, which we perhaps understand more naturally and intuitively than the AI might. Now, that may change, but that's sort of my experience with the tools so far. But so you use Jasper, you're training it up for marketing materials and then scenario AI, which just as we have gone through this explosion, like what tools really sort of drew you in, allowed you to see, and again, you have better perspective than most, where it's like, okay, where like the tools made a leap, where you're like, okay, this is changing things and it's going to make my life easier. It's going to be a great tool, but we have gone from having to sit down with coders and designers to I could be a one-man studio.
Yeah. And when, let's see, Stability AI and Stable Diffusion and the first DALL-E, really like DALL-E and Stable Diffusion were the ones that found me just sitting in my chair with my mouth wide open saying, is this real? I don't understand how this is happening. What I started to realize is that there's a derivative quality where people use that as a negative description. It's derivative. And that's exactly what it is. It's looking at everything that has been created and deriving something from that. So I think to your question, like what woke me up to this, there was a couple of things. There was one, what I just talked about, like seeing text to image technology. You could type in text and get back an image. And that was the first wake up call to me. However, then what I realized was that it's not just text to image, right? Suddenly, very soon after that, we had image to image. So it allows me to put in my image that I drew with my hands with pencil and generate another image based on that image. And then I realized, oh my gosh, there's text to 3D, there's image to 3D, there's text to voice, there's voice to image. And so it's this conversion, this transform. Right? The T in GPT is we're going to transform one thing into another. And so back to the derivative idea, I thought, oh, it's derivative because of what's being put in and what I'm asking it to pull back out. So if I can control what goes in and then have a bit of control over what comes out, then suddenly my whole workflow changes. And you mentioned the painting masters. I think about that, or I think modern, like Andy Warhol, or just interns. It's like I have a team of interns, and I always liked hiring early career folks for interns or early junior designers, but I would always check their work. I wouldn't let them present to Paul Allen. They would present to me, and then I would determine and I would filter. So kind of a broad answer to your question. Did I address what we...
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what's interesting when you say, that term derivative can feel diminishing and dismissive, but we're all a derivative of something. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. I was just talking to somebody yesterday, and he talked about something that I felt was really thoughtful and profound about the sun and the moon, that there are those creative forces that feel like, they burn with the heat of the sun. They are bright. They shine for all of us. And that we are all moons that reflect 10% of the light of the sun. And that's true. But I've been thinking about it. And it's like, but even those suns, like nobody just shows up in, pure of form affected and influenced by no one or anything, and then just blazes. But they too, like the elements that made up their, I guess their helium and nitrogen or whatever, that came from somewhere. But they reflect the light of others as well. Not to get derail the conversation, but there is a wonderful short story, Unaccompanied Sonata, by a guy named Orson Scott Card. And it involves somebody, it's a society where everybody is matched up with like the perfect job, the perfect place. It's a utopia, supposedly. But as we know with all utopias, there's an underlying darkness in that the central character, is a maker, a creator. And he is not meant to be polluted by, he must live by himself, away from other sounds. No influence. What do you create with that? And he created music with this special instrument that would reflect the wind through the trees and the sun coming down. But someone else's role in that society was to be the listener. And so they would gather near the house and listen to this amazing creation. And at some point, one of them approaches him, the maker, and gives him a recording of, I want to say it was Bach, saying like, you need to hear the work of another maker. And then after a little while, he resists, but finally he plays it and is just transported by this creation. But he needs to hide that fact. So the music he's creating, he's trying to avoid expressing anything that is too obvious. And then the government overseers show up and say, give us the recording. We know you have it. And he hands it over. He's like, how did you know? It's like, well, things that are definitive of Bach, you remove them from your own music to hide the fact that you had heard him. And you have been tainted now by the influence of others. And so you need to get knocked down a peg, and the story goes from there. But it's fascinating. Great story. But I think about that sometimes when it comes to creation, that how interesting it would be to, like, what would I create in the absence of other influence? But we can't. We'll never know.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think about that, and I think that the less influence you have, the more influenced you will be by that small set of influences. I'd rather be influenced by everything that has ever been created in the history of humanity rather than just, Bach and Warhol. That's all I know.
But what's interesting, tying into our conversation, though, is that we train up a model, but obviously it is scraped, the creations of humanity that are out there. And, you play around with enough of the visual models where you start to see, like, people will, like, on Twitter or wherever, or X, like, look at what this latest model can do. And you see enough of those and you're like, they all kind of look eerily the same. It's like a woman walking down a street, and that you're like, it's amazing. Yeah. It's like you're all scraping the same stuff.
Yeah.
And where does the originality come in? Where does the distinctiveness come in? Like, yes, fidelity is getting better. Yes, your ability to, like, hands and fingers no longer give it away. Will Smith eating a plate of spaghetti looks a lot better now. But where is the originality, where it's like, okay, that's not any old person. That is a unique person. And I'm sure that's some of what you must be searching for in your give and take with the tools. Yes. Where it's like, I can't have generic on the other side of it. Even if I'm doing marketing material, even if I'm, as you mentioned, cat on a bag, where it's like, okay, but it still needs to have a certain sense, originality, that can only be done with someone on the other side of the tools.
Yeah, with a human starting it. Yeah, the audience of people that see stuff that I create or that creators create is getting more savvy. I hear a lot from people like, oh, I hate that AI look. And these are from non-creative people, but even from creative people. But the non-creative people still see that there is some kind of fakey quality to it. However, and I think you and I talked about this in the past, there's also a whole bunch of created works out there that you don't know were created by AI. And those are the ones that seem authentic and real. But I found with the tools, you have to go in, let me add some authenticity. Let me add some grain, or it can't be so smooth and polished. Or I loved AI pictures with people with 7 fingers. Those are the mistakes, and those are sometimes unique. So, but what I find is that it takes me effort to generate something that looks like my style. So we talked about training a model, but also what I find is that things like Midjourney, which is one of my favorites, some of the things it creates without, if you don't try hard enough, it's going to create something that looks like Midjourney art. It has a particular style if you don't force that style out of it. So I find not only generating a model for myself, but also using multiple tools. So I'll take the best from DALL, the best from a Stable Diffusion, and the best from Midjourney, and then I'll merge all those, or I'll do a blend in some fourth tool, so that suddenly I'm draining out all that derivative aspect of a particular tool and trying to infuse it with my own. And I also think something in what you said, it's what is the intent of the creator? The AI does not have an intent. You are giving it an intent. And a lot of times what it is, I want to create a pretty lady walking down the street in high fidelity photography mode. You're trying to create Elon Musk on the moon. The intent of the creator is coming out in the end of the work, and it's really not inspiring in many cases. So I am drawn to the things such as, and this is why I create some of this stuff, but claymation, or things that have flaws in it, or pencil drawings. I love seeing all the eraser marks and even mistakes. And so I find with AI, I have to go back in and add the mistakes and add those kind of things to try to drain out some of the perfection.
It's so interesting, because I'm sure there was a time and a place where it's like, all I see are the imperfections, but those have been hammered out. And it's like, I need to go back in there. And because we've lost the thread. We've lost.
I look too perfect. Yeah. Why is this? And it's like, okay, we've just empowered a whole generation to create crappy stock photography, But the beauty of it is that, maybe this is not the beauty for companies that provide stock photography, but I haven't had a need in the last year to go and purchase photographs or background textures or, other elements that for 35 years I've been, sourcing. I would have people on my team. If I have a full creative team, I'd have one person who is the intern or the junior designer who's outsourcing things. It's like, oh, we need these images and we need some patterns, and we need you to turn those patterns into seamless patterns that will repeat. So go into Photoshop and do that. There's this whole array of tasks that are no longer.
Yeah. No, 2 of the big stock photo companies, the names escape me at the moment, merged or are in the process of merging, because it's like, okay, let's get some company here to rearrange the chairs on the deck of the Titanic because we're going down, but we got to, make money while we can.
I think there'll still be a place for the really good stuff. And, I hope that photographers who are out with cameras doing true photography will still exist. Some of these people are my friends, I've been paid to do photography shoots in the past, but now some of those same clients are reaching out to me and saying, we'd like to avoid the photo shoot this time. And I think
that's a great way to lead into a question then, because, I have my pet theories about this, but, you talk about, okay, there are people we don't need as much. Like, I have digital interns now, and hoping that professional photographers have their place, but that there will be a place for those who are really good, very distinct, unique.
Yes.
Where do these tools go from here, given how fast you've seen them develop compared to where they were before, projecting out a little bit? What's the impact on those of us who are trying to create these tools, particularly like in your visual realm? Where do things go?
Yeah, it's really exciting. We're here talking about this because, as we've been saying, there's something new every week. And so for 35 years, I've been in the creative industry. And if you do the math, I started before the World Wide Web started. And so that was huge to me in my career. I feel this wave that we're in now is bigger than anything I've seen in my career, 35 years. And just in the last 2 years, it's gone from zero to hero, and it's been around, obviously, but boom, we've had this explosion. So where do we go from here? It's going to come quickly. And I think a few things that I'm hoping to see. One is control. So, and more consistency. So a lot of times what a creative person is frustrated by with something like Midjourney or any of the tools, you get an image that's almost what you want. You're like, oh, let me try to mutate that. Let me give some more prompts. And then other things in the image will change. Now it's worse. Okay, let me try again. And you fix those things. You don't have this control and you don't have a consistency. That's why I use tools like Scenario AI to try to work part of your workflow to create a character, for instance, or create an image. And then later in the workflow, try to use that same character or use that same image, but get a different angle on it, or the character smiles or frowns. And in most AI right now, then the character starts looking different, or suddenly they're wearing a hat, or, why do they have a bow tie? So I think we're going to see a lot of that, a lot of control and consistency and the ability to mutate specific aspects of your image. We're also seeing a lot of text to 3D or image to 3D. So what I want when I'm creating a character for a children's book or something, I want to work with AI to help me create this character based on some sketches that I did, and then be able to spin it around. And okay, now I need a high angle shot. Now I need a low angle shot. Oh, now I need to follow behind over the shoulder shot. And it seems funny to say, like, that's my expectation now. Like, oh, okay, don't just give me this amazing image. Do it, from a different angle, specifically this angle, and match this other angle perfectly so that I can do a cut, between two shots. And then, the other thing I was thinking about that I want, basically your question to me is, what are all the new tools you want to play with, Todd? And one of them is real time. And we're starting to see this. So right now we're amazed that I can type in a prompt, and in Midjourney, if I'm in fast mode, it'll come back in 10 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, depends on how busy, what time of day. But this is going to be instant. And this is going to be me, like when I'm in Photoshop and I drag a brush across the screen, I want to be able to do that with AI. So turn my character, or pull the sides of my character's mouth up to indicate happiness, or pivot the camera and just have it redraw instantly. We're already seeing some of this where you're painting with your mouse or your stylus on one side of the screen and it's enhancing it on the right. So you draw a very simple house with a mountain and a sun and a sky. Over on the right, it's generating oil painting version of that. These are the things that I want, Andy. Bring them to me.
Well, it's funny. That is a recurring theme that's come up in these conversations about, the hope of the future, but our impatience with miracles.
Yes.
Where it's just like, okay, just today I was able to take a photo and turn it into a 3D environment that a video game character could walk around. Now I want to be able to populate it, and I want to be able to do this, and this to that space instantly. Why can't I do that yet? But because so many people want that, I think we're going to get that. I don't know what the timing of that's going to be, but it's like, okay, yeah, it's going to improve, whether it's video game design, whether it is, but, like you're saying, like the ability to make a shot, the consistency between, like, I have a model and you have just made the model for me. Now I want to be able to manipulate the model. I want to be able to spin it around. I want to be able to take this shot, this shot, this shot. And I certainly have played with, like, that idea that I dusted off. It's TV show, but could be a graphic novel. And so I'm playing with it, and I'm like feeding in a prompt into I think it was DALL-E, and getting art back. But then it's like, okay, but now I want a group shot because it's, it's sort of a group superhero thing. And it's like, okay, you're changing things. It would look really good the way it was before. Stop changing things. But like that consistency is going to come. Like that's one of the, I don't even want to say a holy grail because it's supposed to be hard to get. Like, that they're going to figure this out. They're already on their way to that. And that opens up so many possibilities, the ability for anybody at home, if you have the tools and access, obviously access is an issue, but that if you have the creativity, you can create.
Yeah. And it reduces that time from concept to execution. It really does. It allows for two ends of a spectrum. One, it's very easy to create a lot of crap. And like, that's what we're seeing, and we will continue to see. It's very easy to create. And so people will create very bad stuff. Lots of it, like at industrial scale, beyond industrial scale.
Well, I mean, isn't that TikTok's model?
Right, exactly. And I remember, early in my career, I was paid to use Photoshop to edit photos. I worked for the 3M Corporation, and different executives would come to me and they'd have different projects, and I would take half a day to edit their photo, in Photoshop, edit their images. And then Instagram came out, and suddenly people had filters and they could do it with one button. And it generated a lot of great photographers, or we learned about a lot of great photographers, but also we swam through a river of crap to get there. And I think we're going to see the same thing, but I'm still excited about it because I don't care about the river of crap. I want to see those things that are created by people who might not have had a chance before and don't have access to a studio. So you're right, access is super important. I used to teach at 911 Media Arts Center here in Seattle. It got renamed to Seattle Media Arts Center, and it was really a place that was open to the community and to underprivileged people who wanted access to cameras and editing gear and whatnot. And over the years, there was less and less that community needed. You need the support, you need time, and you need a laptop or access to some computer. And so the fact that we've reduced it to that's still a hurdle to a lot. But even in public schools, you can have, students have access to this, or you can go to libraries. And the fact that you can create this stuff on these machines, which are essentially terminals into the sky of the great machine. And I think we're going to see we're already starting to see it, a lot of great storytelling from voices that maybe we haven't traditionally heard of. And hopefully it doesn't get drowned out by, Elon Musk rides a bicycle on the moon. And,
Well, yeah. I mean, I was listening to a show and they were talking about how, you've got the AI slop that's out there, but you just have to look at it as like, okay, some people want to see that, but like you're going to end up having AI tools to help defend you from the AI slop.
Yeah.
But it is sort of self-selecting in that you just see it as all as fertilizer, and some beautiful things are going to grow from that that wouldn't have otherwise, just because of the access to the tools. And I probably, you may have heard me go on this rant before, but like my son, he's in college. He was taking some film classes and photography classes, and I was just like, I would have killed for your iPhone when I was in college playing around with 16 millimeter film, having to slice it with a razor blade, having to like change reels in a black bag so that the film didn't get exposed. And like, you can just film, slap it onto your laptop, cut something together, and it's good. And that power that, and again, AI is empowering like shots that you could never get on your iPhone. You can now get by using these models.
And I'm seeing, I totally agree with what you just said. I'm seeing almost a guilt or in some creatives or in myself where it's like, man, there's no excuses anymore. It's like, I used to be able to say, well, I can't make a movie. I can't afford the film. Okay, now there's video. Video's looking just as good. Well, I don't have a nice video camera. The excuses are running out. And I think it comes down to, you realize when you have all the tools that you need to create something, the only thing left is your story or your voice. And it's almost like a fear or a guilt. Like I have the ability that people throughout history, creative people throughout history, have not had this. What am I going to create? Is it going to be just adding to the stream of crap, or is it going to be something unique? And that's what I hope for myself. And as you mentioned, I try to make my stuff look different, but I really try to make it look like the stuff I was drawing in junior high school, basically, which is goofy characters, big eyeballs, explosions and weird stuff. And so if I can achieve that, now I'm starting to put together stories, the stories that I've always wanted to tell. And I've gone back to my old journals from decades ago and saying, oh, I had that crazy idea about the rock band traveling on a spaceship or whatever. And I can do that now. I have no more excuses.
Any imposter syndrome that we may have as creators, it's like, well, now's the time to find out if you are an imposter, because you can create. The barriers aren't there. One of the things that I have struggled with is that idea that difficulty is supposed to be part of the process. Like it's supposed to be hard, and that from that, challenge rises up something that is, better, pure, whatever. The act of creation, it still isn't easy, but like when you have the tools to be able to ease the path, I'm kind of having to let go of that. Like it's got to be really hard and, overcoming those hurdles. Like, no, creation, you watch kids, like they create on the fly all the time. And tapping into that, and again, the tools are there. And if you have the story sense or the artistic sense, that you can rapidly go through iteration to get to the place that would have taken you so much longer.
Yeah, I agree. There's that flow state, and there's effort to get there. I think I talk to a lot of friends and colleagues who are still apprehensive about AI, and this is part of it. Like in the old days, you had to use your pencil, and you want to be a painter. Okay, draw with the pencil for 5 years. Okay, then we're going to start talking about the qualities of paint. Then you're going to learn. And nowadays, some of that, it's all very important, but I think some of the creative professionals that I know think they're being leapfrogged by people with no fundamentals and misunderstanding of the fundamentals of design. But I still think there's effort. Like, that's the thing that I keep telling them. Like, you say it's easy. Yes, it's easy to say, cat eating an ice cream cone. That's super easy. Yeah, I just said it. And now you can type it in. But does that create art? Probably not. I'm really looking for, and combine this answer with the question you asked earlier about what I'm hoping for. Like, if we take this to its logical conclusion, then it's real-time creation in a flow state. So listeners at home don't see I have just normal eyeglasses on. If I could have a pair of glasses like this that were, really like goggles are today, where I could interact with the computer, I could see things in front of me, and I could just come up with an idea on a walk with my dog and having a conversation with the AI. It's creating images, asking me questions. I'm telling it that's not good enough. Tweak this. And by the end of my dog walk, I have, a cartoon that's like a Bugs Bunny cartoon or whatever it might be. I think that's possible, and that's not that far away. And it's still effort, but might there just be the effort of thinking? It's still a hard thing to do, to think, especially for me. And I look at this, and I guess my reaction to a lot of that is it is hard. I am putting a lot of effort into it, although I'm doing things like painting or talking or drawing certain sketches specifically to try to explain to the AI what I'm talking about. And so those are still tasks that I do, just a totally different set of tasks. I still do the old tasks, but now I have this whole new set of tasks.
Yeah, it's one, I'm imagining your ideal future where our dogs are very well exercised and we have a lot of awesome, beautiful things in the world. But also just that, what is the work, right? Where, I, as a freelancer and working with clients and doing some world building as I am on a project right now, it's like, okay, I have to put in an invoice for hours. Like, okay, do I count the 2 hours I was walking my dog and spending mental energy in that world, trying to think through the rules of the space and how things operate? Because that's the creative work. Like, I'm going to put it into words, but like, that is time spent in creation.
Yes.
That, you don't have to be pencil to paper for that that's the only work that counts.
Just have your clients call me. I'll tell them that it is truly working. I know he's just sitting in the corner, like staring out the window, but he's working very hard. And it's true. And, it's, that I like a work-life balance, but the boundaries are fuzzier than they used to be for me and most of the world.
Yes, 100%. I literally could talk to you for hours, but I want to be mindful of your time. But is there one last piece of advice for someone who's listening to this and is maybe feeling a little trepidatious about it, or maybe even a little sort of judgy, or like questioning the ethics of using tools like this? Something, or just somebody who's just curious, like how other people are using AI and have gotten to a place as you have, where you're very open about the fact that it is a part of your workflow. What's one thing that you, at the tail end of this conversation, that you would want someone to walk away with feeling or thinking about AI?
It's amazing. It's so hard to sum this up. And even between the time we're recording this and when it will be broadcast, quote unquote, there will probably be 10 more changes. The thing I tell young creative folks and old folks like me, but, is that it doesn't really matter what you wish it was like. The world is what it is, and the genie is out of the bottle. There is no way it's going back in the bottle. So whether you want to deal with it or not, you need to, and you can stake out your position to it. And I think there are true concerns that I have, just broadly ethical concerns. Two of those being, one, we're an energy hog right now, although there are, just in the last week with DeepSeek, we've seen apparently they built what other companies took a gazillion kilowatts to do, that they did it in a lot less. But so that's still a concern. And also the concern of how we train these, or is there implicit bias in it? If you train the model on the internet, and the internet is a bunch of angry people and cat lovers, that influences what the AI is. So be ethical and, understand that this is part of the process. Don't let it take over your whole process, but invite it in and see what it can do for you. And see if you can allow yourself as a creative person to do the fun stuff and have the intern AI do all the non-fun stuff. Me as a creative director, that, my teams like me, but I was very clear that you are here, you've been here for 6 months and you just graduated college, you're doing the crap work. And, that's just the way it is. And
you will do the cherub, you're involved.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if this is something to wrap up at the end, but of the iron triangle. Or usually when I bring up the iron triangle, half the people in the room know what I'm talking about and the other half don't. So I'll quickly explain it, but I think it applies to this as a creative person working professionally. So I'm not an artist, I'm a designer. Artists ask questions and designers solve problems. And so when I'm doing work for a client, there's the iron triangle, which is 3 things. You change any one of these 3 things, and just like a triangle, it's going to change from an isosceles to with geometry, but you change it. So those 3 areas, one is time, one is quality, and one is cost. So the smart ass way to say it, so you have time and quality and cost. It's really saying fast, good, or cheap. You can pick 2. All right. So it can be fast and cheap, but your project is not going to be good quality, or it can be really good and we can do it really fast, but it's going to be really expensive. Each of these things affects each other. And so the thing is, we can speed things up. AI throws a wrench into that, which has been the driving force of my professional work, to try to do something that's high quality and do it fast, but not make it prohibitively expensive. Now I can do things faster and I can do them cheaper, but it's not necessarily higher quality. So fast, good, cheap. Those things you're juggling. Use the AI to try to improve the speed, reduce the cost, but also keep the quality up. Like, can we get to a point where the iron triangle, where I can stop teaching about that? Because you can make it affordable and cheap and good.
That would be the holy grail. As long as people are still in the equation, and it's not that, what was at the heart of the holy grail was people.
You never remove them.
Now that we've gotten rid of the triangle, we can get rid of the people.
Yes.
Again, this has been truly fantastic. I appreciate your time. I'm sure that people are going to get a lot out of this. So I look forward to continuing to see your artwork out there, and maybe we can end up working on something together one of these days.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Andy. It's great talking to you. And I'm glad that you're doing this. Like, a lot of what we hear about with AI is technical or non-creative people doing creative things. There's really a whole community of us who consider ourselves creative people. And I call myself a professional creative person. We need to hear about these things and how it affects us and our jobs, our life, and our visions and our artwork.
Yeah, it's I think an important conversation to be having at large, where, we're all struggling through the same things and being excited about the same things. And it's good just to talk about it as we're just in the middle of it all. It'll be fascinating to look back at these conversations at some point and say, like, oh, how naive we were, or like, oh, how prescient.
I had no idea. Yeah.
Yeah. But all right. Thanks again. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks a lot.